Billionaire CEO sees the cleaning lady's son, who looks just like him. Then the boy calls him Dad in public. Before we begin, we'd love to know what city are you watching from. Leave it in the comments, and at the end, don't forget to give this story a rating from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Daddy, will you play with me after dinner? The words came from a 5-year-old boy in sneakers too clean for a party like this. His voice soft, but loud enough to stop a ballroom. Dozens of heads turned. Champagne flutes froze midair. And in the middle of it all, Billionaire CEO Daniel Whitmore turned slowly and looked down at a child with his eyes, Rachel Taylor, still holding a silver tray near the marble staircase, felt the blood drain from her face. Her son had just called a man daddy in front of governors, investors, and the man who didn't even know he had a son. She had kept the secret for 5 years. Until now, Rachel Taylor knew how to disappear. Born in a small town in Montgomery, Alabama, she was the kind of girl the world never noticed. Middle of 3 kids, raised by a mother who worked nights. She learned early how to scrub floors, reheat leftovers in old jars, and stay out of the way. By 17, she left with nothing but a duffel bag, a cracked phone, and a dream she couldn't name. New York didn't care who she was, but Rachel didn't ask for much. She worked in diners, laundromats, even hospitals, anything to survive, until one day she was hired as cleaning staff at the Whitmore estate. They said it was just for the summer. 5 years later, she was still there, a ghost in pressed khaki and rubber soles. She cleaned corners no one looked at. She changed linens that cost more than her rent. She called the billion-dollar CEO sir and avoided eye contact like it was a rule. And then came Leo, her son. He was born in the public hospital near 138th Street. Quiet, fast, eyes wide open, like he already knew the world would be unfair. Rachel never planned to raise a child behind the back wing of a mansion, but that's where life put her, and she did everything to protect him. Because no one, not even Daniel Whitmore, knew the truth about that night. One night, that was all it had been. A night 5 years ago, when grief and loneliness broke down 2 very different people. She had just learned her sister's cancer had returned. He had just buried someone he never spoke about. There was no love, no plan, just a quiet hour in a room too big for silence. He forgot. She didn't. She raised Leo in secret in a staff unit the size of a closet. She taught him to be kind, to stay quiet when guests arrived, to never ask about the man in the suit. But children see what we try to hide. Leo had his eyes, the same thoughtful stare, the same way of walking. And lately, he started asking questions. Mom, why does he look like me? Where's my dad? Rachel told herself she could lie a little longer, that her love would be enough. But love doesn't erase the truth, and 5-year-olds don't keep secrets. They only know what they feel. So when Rachel begged him to stay hidden during the gala, please, baby, tonight is different. Just tonight. He had nodded. But promises are different when you're 5, because when the chandeliers glowed and the crowd hushed for the opening toast, a little boy in clean sneakers stepped into the marble light and walked straight toward the man who never knew he had a son. Chapter 1. Daddy, will you play with me? A child's innocent question shatters 5 years of silence, public exposure, humiliation, and a reckoning. What happens when a truth you've buried walks into the light? Daddy, will you play with me after dinner? The room froze. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the center of the ballroom. The chandelier overhead glittered like it knew a secret. Champagne glasses trembled mid-toast. A senator's wife dropped her crystal flute, and the sound of it shattering was the only thing louder than the silence. Rachel Taylor stood at the far end of the room, a silver tray still balanced in her hands, but her world had already collapsed. The boy standing beside Daniel Whitmore had soft curls, sneakers that squeaked slightly on the marble, and the exact same storm-colored eyes. Her son, Leo, he was only 5, but he had just said the one word Rachel had spent 5 years praying he'd never say out loud, Daddy, and he had said it with joy, with certainty, as if there was no question, but there were questions, too many, and all of them were now hanging in the air like shattered glass. Daniel turned slowly, blinking down at the child, tugging his tailored sleeve. His face was unreadable, that same steely gaze that had once shaken government boards and corporate mergers. But tonight, it met a 5-year-old boy who looked just like him. Rachel couldn't move. Her knees felt waterlogged, her throat closed like it had been locked from the inside. The tray in her hands tilted dangerously. No one in that room laughed. No one dared to speak, because deep down, everyone saw it. They saw the truth she'd buried in silence, the resemblance, the ache, the moment that didn't fit into a mansion like this. Rachel's world spun. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted to be let out. All she could see was Leo's small hand resting gently on Daniel's expensive sleeve. Please, no, please, baby, not like this. She finally found her voice brittle and cracking. I'm sorry, sir. She stumbled forward, trying to reach them, words falling out in pieces. He doesn't know what he's saying. Please, he's just a child. Daniel stepped back. His face didn't change not much, but the sharpness in his voice cut through the tension like a blade. Who is this boy? Rachel reached them, breathless now, her whole body trembling. Her eyes stung, but she didn't dare blink. He's my son. Daniel's head tilted just slightly, but it was like watching a glacier shift. Your son? Yes, she whispered. His name is Leo. Somewhere in the back, someone chuckled a low, cruel sound. Another voice whispered too loudly. Is this a joke? Daniel's voice sharpened. You bring your child into my home into this event and teach him to call me his father. No. Rachel's voice cracked. I swear I never told him that. He doesn't understand. Then why would he say it? His voice rose, not a shout, but worse, cold, dangerous. Leo flinched. Rachel dropped to her knees, arms around her son. I'm so sorry. He meant no harm. Please. He's just a little boy. Daniel's eyes locked on hers. Really looked at her for the first time in years. Not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as something else. A memory flickered behind his eyes. Something long buried. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Rachel stood slowly, voice breaking. We'll go. I'll take him back. Please. Daniel's voice, low and final. Do that. She took Leo's hand, her tray forgotten, and walked away through the stares and the whispers and the shame that clung to her like a second skin. In the service hallway, Leo tugged her sleeve. His voice was soft. Mom, why did he look at me like that? Did I do something bad? Rachel stopped. Her heart cracked in 2 places. She knelt down, brushing his curls away from his face with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. No, sweetheart, she whispered. You did nothing wrong. Leo's brow furrowed. Then why did he say he's not my dad? Rachel's voice broke. Because he doesn't know who you really are. Leo didn't cry. He just nodded solemn and small, like a soldier following orders he didn't understand. That night, in the tiny apartment behind the east wing, Rachel sat on the edge of their bed. Her uniform was still stained from the tray she dropped. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking. She watched Leo sleep, one hand curled under his cheek, the other resting on a crayon drawing. The secret was no longer hers. It had exploded in the middle of the most powerful room in the state. And now she didn't know what would come next. But something had changed forever. What do you do when your past walks into the light and calls you mom in front of the man who never knew he was a father? Chapter 2. The Woman Behind the Uniform. Rachel's buried past revealed a life built on silence. What if your deepest truth was something no one believed and no one asked about? Who was she before the tray, the uniform, the mansion? Rachel Taylor hadn't always been invisible. There was a time long before marble floors and whispered orders, when her laughter used to echo down dirt roads in Montgomery, Alabama, when her only job was to chase fireflies barefoot in the summer and dream of leaving. But dreams cost money, and money was the one thing her family never had. Her mother scrubbed floors at the community hospital by day and cleaned motel bathrooms at night. Her father, when he showed up, left more dents in the wall than dollars on the table. So Rachel learned young, don't ask for more than you're given. She wore secondhand shoes 2 sizes too big, skipped prom to pick up a double shift, and learned to smile even when she was starving. But she was smart, too smart for the life she'd been handed. At 17, with her high school diploma folded in her Bible and $57 in a Ziploc bag, she got on a Greyhound bus and never looked back. New York City was 1,000 kinds of cold, but Rachel didn't give up. She cleaned hotel bathrooms during the day and stocked shelves in Harlem at night. She learned how to move without being noticed, how to listen more than speak, how to survive. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't safe, but it was hers, until the job opened up in Greenwich cleaning staff for the Whitmore estate. Someone at the hotel had passed her name along. They said the pay was good, the hours decent, and the man in charge rarely even noticed the help. Rachel moved into a small staff apartment tucked behind the east wing, one room. No windows, but privacy. The mansion was a world apart. Chandeliers that cost more than her mother's life insurance. Artwork that hung like judgment. And voices that lowered when she entered a room. She didn't mind. Invisibility kept her safe. She ironed bed sheets for billionaires, served drinks to senators, and learned how to clean crystal without leaving a fingerprint. She spoke only when spoken to. She learned the silent language of power and how to survive within it. And then there was him, Daniel Whitmore, billionaire, CEO, stoic and untouchable. He rarely spoke to her, never smiled, but once, just once, his eyes lingered. It was 5 years ago, a late summer night, a celebration on the estate lawn for his company's merger. Rachel had worked a double shift that day. Her feet ached. Her blouse clung to her back with sweat, but she moved through the crowd like a shadow. She was clearing glasses near the garden when she heard him say, "Leave it." His voice, low but tired. She didn't. She turned anyway and saw him alone on a bench, staring at nothing, a glass of scotch in his hand, and grief written across his face like it had nowhere else to go. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, almost turning away, but he spoke. "Don't go." She froze. "I just buried the only person who remembered what I looked like before all of this," he said, motioning vaguely toward the mansion. Rachel didn't know what to say, so she sat, not close, just enough. And for one strange hour under soft garden lights, two people who didn't belong to each other sat in silence and didn't feel alone. He asked nothing of her, and she offered nothing but presence. But pain is a dangerous thing when it finds someone who listens. One thing led to another. A touch, a kiss, a night where grief made them human. In the morning, she went back to being invisible, and he went back to never looking at her again. Rachel didn't expect more. She didn't want it. But 3 weeks later, she found herself staring at a pregnancy test on the chipped bathroom sink of her apartment, and all the air disappeared from the room. She didn't cry. She just sat down and whispered to herself, "You are going to do this alone, if you have to." And she did. Leo came quietly into the world at Harlem General. No family, no birth plan, just a single mother holding a baby boy who had eyes she couldn't explain away. She never told Daniel, not out of spite, not for shame, but because she knew no one would believe her, not the staff, not the world, not even him. She told herself it didn't matter, that her love would be enough. In the years that followed, Leo grew fast, too fast. He watched. He noticed. He started asking questions. Where's my dad? Why don't we have a house like the other kids? Why does that man walk like me? And Rachel? She ran out of lies. She took him 2 towns over on Sundays so he could play at parks where no one knew him. She worked extra shifts to buy colored pencils because he loved to draw. And she cried at night into a pillow she'd stitched from an old uniform shirt. She never brought him into the main house. And until the night of the gala, until the moment he slipped out when no one was watching and walked right up to Daniel Whitmore, the man who never even knew he had a son, and said the word that changed everything. "Daddy, you can hide behind uniforms and silence, but children see the truth, and sometimes they speak it out loud." Chapter 3, He Walks Like Me. A child starts to see himself in a man who's never looked at him. Rachel discovers Leo's drawing and the word "dad" written in crayon. How do you protect your child from the truth when they already feel it in their bones? Leo had never been a loud child. He didn't throw tantrums. He didn't whine for toys. He didn't scream in grocery stores or stomp his feet when things didn't go his way. But he noticed everything. The way Rachel's voice changed when she said no too gently. The way the other kids in the neighborhood clung to their father's hands on school pickup days. The way Daniel Whitmore walked head slightly down, eyes far away like someone always thinking, never feeling. Leo watched. From behind doors, from garden hedges, from stairwells where no one thought to look down. And slowly, piece by piece, he built a picture in his head of a man he'd never spoken to, but who moved like him. One Saturday afternoon, Rachel found him in the garden behind the east wing. He was sitting cross-legged under the old magnolia tree, knees dusty, a drawing pad on his lap. She smiled. "What you working on, baby?" Leo didn't look up. "Just drawing." Rachel knelt beside him. The drawing was simple crayon lines, bold colors, 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. Both had big eyes, but it was the word above the taller one that broke her. "Dad." Her throat closed. Her knees gave a little. She sat down beside him, the dirt pressing through her skirt, her heart pounding like it was trying to escape. "That's nice," she managed. Leo looked up at her. Innocent, curious. "Do you think he'd like it?" Rachel blinked. "Who?" "Sweetheart. The man in the suit. The one who lives in the big part of the house." She tried to steady her breathing. "Why do you think of him when you draw this?" Leo didn't hesitate. "He walks like me." That night, Rachel stood in the kitchenette of their tiny apartment, holding that drawing like it was a live wire. Her hands shook, her mind swirled, and in the quiet hum of the fridge and Leo's gentle snoring from the bed behind her, Rachel whispered a truth she hadn't said out loud in 5 years. "You deserve to know who you are." But the words went nowhere. They hung in the air like a broken prayer. Because what if he asked why his father never came for him? What if she had to explain that one night doesn't always mean something? That sometimes people touch your life and walk away without looking back? What if Daniel denied everything, called her a liar? What if Leo ended up carrying rejection heavier than silence? She placed the drawing gently into the kitchen drawer, beneath old bills and expired coupons, and closed it slowly, like it could bury what her heart couldn't. Days passed, but Leo didn't forget. He began watching more, following Daniel from afar, studying the way he held a pen, the way he paused before speaking, the way his voice dipped at the end of sentences. And one morning, while Rachel scrubbed the tile near the back foyer, Leo stood by the window and whispered, "He even thinks like me." Rachel froze. Cloth in hand, she looked up at him. Her little boy, with eyes too big for his face and a mind too old for his age. "What makes you say that?" Leo shrugged. "I can just feel it." Rachel couldn't speak. She just pulled him close and kissed the top of his head like it would undo what had already taken root. Later that night, she found another drawing on Leo's bed. This time, the two figures were holding hands, and the taller one had Daniel's suit. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and held it to her chest like it could make her stronger. She remembered everything about that night, the night Leo was conceived, the way Daniel had looked so lost, even surrounded by people, the way he'd said, "It's hard being seen, only as someone powerful. When all you feel is tired." She hadn't meant for anything to happen. She hadn't expected warmth or forever, just connection. But 5 years later, that connection had a name, a face, and a voice that called out "Daddy" without knowing what that word could do. Rachel stood in the shower long after the water turned cold. She whispered apologies to no one and prayed that tomorrow Leo wouldn't ask again. But children don't stop asking just because the answers hurt. You can dodge questions, hide drawings, bury truth, but when a child sees himself in someone else, no lie is safe forever. Chapter 4, Promise Me You'll Stay Inside. A mother begs her child to hide while the world watches. Leo steps into the light into Daniel's world and says the one word that breaks everything. Can innocence protect us from truth? Or will it only expose us faster? The sky over Greenwich was pale gold that evening. One of those early spring nights where the light hangs too long, like it doesn't want to let go. Inside the Whitmore estate, everything shimmered. The marble floors had been buffed until they glowed. The chandeliers glittered like frozen fire. Silver trays floated from gloved hands. Ice clinked gently in glass after glass of aged bourbon. It was the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala, a place where power mingled in tuxedos and promises were made over champagne and eye contact. Rachel had worked for 2 weeks straight to prepare for this night. Every corner cleaned, every napkin folded, every instruction from Edward Hill memorized. Tonight is flawless. He had warned her just that morning. We are hosting governors, senators, billionaire donors. Nothing, and I mean nothing, goes wrong. Rachel had nodded, throat tight. She knew her place. She always had. Back in her apartment, behind the east wing, Leo was humming softly to himself. He sat on the small braided rug, drawing with the last of his green crayon, a tree, a sun, a tall man with a briefcase. The page was half full, but his mind wasn't on it. Rachel stood at the door, watching him, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You understand, right?" she asked softly. Leo looked up. "Tonight is different," she said again, kneeling beside him. "I need you to stay here, just for a few hours. Promise me." "Why?" he asked. "Is it dangerous?" She brushed a hand through his curls. "No, baby. It's just people like me work, people like them. Watch, and you don't belong in either world tonight." Leo tilted his head. "But I live here, too." Rachel's heart cracked. She nodded anyway. "I know. Just promise me you'll stay inside." Leo looked at her for a long moment. "Okay, Mom," he whispered. "I promise." But 5-year-olds make promises the way birds sing, not to keep secrets, just because it's what they're taught to do. An hour later, Rachel was in the ballroom, a tray in her hands, her back aching, her shoes tight across her toes. She moved between politicians and CEOs, between fragile egos and invisible eyes. In the center of it all stood Daniel Whitmore, sharp suit, colder stare. He didn't speak much tonight, just nodded and raised his glass when needed. The room moved around him like planets orbiting the sun. He was everything Rachel had never been. Powerful, distant, untouchable, and completely unaware that his son had just padded down the side hall. Tiny sneakers tapping gently against the polished floor. It happened slow, then all at once. At first, no one noticed. A child at an adult party didn't belong, so people assumed he was staff. But as he moved closer toward the center of the marble room, heads began to turn, brows furrowed. Someone whispered. Then he tugged Daniel's sleeve. The room exhaled and then stopped breathing. Daniel turned. Leo looked up at him, face full of light, voice clear and steady. "Daddy, will you play with me after dinner?" It was like someone had dropped a grenade in the room. Gasps, shocked silence. A glass shattered on the floor. Rachel, from across the ballroom, dropped her tray. The sound echoed. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she saw was her son, and the man she'd once held onto in the dark, standing face to face in the brightest room in the state. Daniel stared at Leo, his hand, still holding a glass, slowly lowered. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Because the boy, this tiny stranger, had his eyes, and something deeper, something Daniel hadn't dared feel in years. Recognition. Rachel ran forward. "Sir, please, I'm so sorry. He doesn't know what he's saying. He's just a child." Daniel's voice, cold and sharp. "Who is this boy?" She couldn't breathe. She forced the words out like broken glass. "He's my son." The silence sharpened. Laughter, somewhere in the back, short, cruel, unkind. "Your son?" Daniel asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Then why is he calling me daddy? I swear, I never told him. He sees you, and I think he knows." Daniel stepped back. A wall slammed into place behind his eyes. "You bring your child here, into my home, and teach him to do this." "No." Rachel's voice cracked. "I would never." "Then explain it." His voice rose, dangerously quiet now. "Explain why he's looking at me like that." Leo flinched. Rachel dropped to her knees and pulled him close. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Please, we'll leave." Daniel said nothing, but his eyes were no longer cold. They were searching, and for the first time in years, they didn't see a cleaning lady. They saw a woman he'd once needed, and a boy who looked too much like him to ignore. Rachel stood, hands shaking. She took Leo's hand, and together they walked toward the staff hallway, past whispers, sideways glances, and the kind of judgment you never quite shake off. Back in the corridor, Leo's voice cracked. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" Rachel knelt. "No. Sweetheart, you just told the truth, and the truth can scare people." "Then why did he look like he hated me?" Rachel's voice broke. "He doesn't hate you. He just doesn't know yet." Leo nodded, but his eyes stayed sad. That night, Rachel sat on the edge of their bed, still in her uniform, her fingers trembling around the drawing Leo had left on the pillow. The tall figure still held the smaller hand, and the word Dad was still there, written in bright blue crayon. You can lock the doors. You can beg your child to stay hidden, but some truths walk into the light anyway, and once they do, nothing goes back to silence. Chapter 5. The Room That Went Silent. A mother humiliated, a son confused, a father confronted by the mirror he never expected. Daniel sees the photo the night returns. What happens when your truth is finally heard, but still not believed? The service hallway had never felt colder. Rachel walked with Leo clutched to her side, past gleaming silver carts and linen closets. Her knees threatened to give, but she didn't stop. Not until the doors closed behind them and the weight of 100 stairs could no longer reach them. She collapsed against the wall. Leo stood silently beside her, tiny fists balled at his sides. His eyes were dry, but he looked older, not in years, but in something else, something broken. Why did he look at me like that? He whispered. Rachel swallowed hard. Because he wasn't ready to see you. Did I do something bad? No, she said quickly, her voice cracking. You told the truth, sweetheart. That's never wrong. Then why did he say, he's not my dad? Rachel reached for him, pulled him to her chest. Her hands trembled as she cupped his face. Because he doesn't know the truth yet. Leo didn't speak. He just nodded slowly, like someone accepting something too heavy to carry. That night, after she tucked Leo into bed and waited for his soft breathing to even out, Rachel went to the closet. She reached for a small wooden box tucked between winter coats and cleaning supplies. Inside, a single photo, faded at the edges, curled slightly from years of hiding. It showed her and Daniel on the lawn during that long-ago staff party, his arm around her shoulders, a half smile on his lips. She was holding a tray. He was holding a glass. But more than that, he was looking at her, and in that moment, captured forever, he looked like a man who saw her. Rachel stared at the photo for a long time. Her fingers traced the shape of his smile. Not for herself, not for romance, not for the fantasy she never let herself believe in, but for Leo. He deserved to know he came from something real, not perfect, not planned, but real. She took a deep breath, folded the photo gently. Stand you as moment, wrote a note in the smallest, shakiest handwriting her nerves would allow. And the next morning, before anyone saw her, she slipped it under the door of Grant Thompson, Daniel's trusted assistant. Grant didn't open the envelope right away. He'd known Rachel for years, the quiet, steady cleaner, who moved like she was apologizing for taking up space. But something about the weight of that envelope, the smudge of her thumbprint on the corner, made him pause. When he finally opened it, he read her note, just a few trembling lines about a night, a boy, and a secret kept too long. Then he saw the photo, and he froze. Because he remembered that night, remembered how Daniel had walked off after the toast, and Rachel had been sent to find him. Remembered how they didn't come back for nearly an hour. And in this photo, now that he looked closely, Daniel was smiling, and the boy Leo had those same eyes. Later that afternoon, Grant entered Daniel's study without knocking. Daniel sat behind his desk, flipping through contracts. Cold, focused. Something I should know, he asked without looking up. Grant held out the envelope in silence. Daniel took it, unfolded the photo, read the note, and sat back slowly, as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. His hand gripped the edge of the desk. Did you know about this? He asked quietly. No, Grant said. But after last night, I suspected. Daniel didn't speak. He just kept staring at the photo. For the first time in years, Rachel noticed something strange the next morning. Daniel didn't walk past her like usual. He paused, met her eyes, said nothing, but looked at her like he was really seeing her for the first time. 2 days later, a small box appeared outside her apartment door. Inside, a brand new set of drawing supplies, markers, sketchbooks, pastels. No name, no card, just one handwritten line on a slip of paper. Keep creating. Rachel knew that handwriting. Her hand shook as she folded the note. She looked over at Leo, who was already tearing through the box with wide eyes. His face lit up a smile, untainted by fear, rejection, or history. She wanted to believe this was a start, but what if it wasn't? What if it was just a gesture, a way to soothe guilt and walk away? That night, Rachel stood in the kitchen staring at the note, her knuckles white against the edge of the counter. She was terrified, terrified of hope, terrified that he might try and then stop, that Leo would be seen and then forgotten. So many what-ifs she couldn't voice. But she also couldn't ignore the way Daniel's eyes had lingered, or the way Leo smiled just holding those markers like he'd been given the world. In another wing of the house, Daniel sat in his office long after the lights dimmed. The photo rested on his desk. The note beside it, he hadn't told anyone, not the board, not his lawyer, not even himself, not out loud. But that boy, he had his eyes, his stillness, his silence before speaking. Daniel remembered the night clearly now, not the details, not the timeline, but the feeling, the way he'd felt seen, held. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't thinking about shareholders or strategy. He was thinking about a little boy and a woman who had never asked for anything. Sometimes the loudest moments are the ones when no one speaks, but everything begins to change. Chapter 6. He Has Your Eyes. Recognition begins in silence and ends in undeniable truth. Daniel sees Leo differently for the first time, and Rachel makes the quietest choice of courage. What happens when the truth you've buried begins to look back at you? For the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark, listening to the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the low hum of the house at rest, and the way silence now pressed heavier than any corporate decision he'd ever made. On his nightstand sat the photo Rachel had given him. It wasn't posed, wasn't glamorous. It was just a moment, him and her in the garden, 5 years younger, both smiling in that unguarded way that happens only when grief collides with comfort. And he remembered it now, the way her voice had steadied him, the way she hadn't looked at him like a CEO or a billionaire or someone untouchable, just a man, worn out and alone. He hadn't meant to cross the line that night, but he hadn't pulled back either. And now there was a boy with his eyes and the same silence before speaking. Daniel rose early the next morning and stood at his study window, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold. He watched the side garden, and there beneath the old magnolia was Leo, sitting cross-legged, drawing, again, like nothing had happened, like the Gala hadn't broken the world open. And for a moment, Daniel's breath caught in his chest, because the boy looked up and squinted into the light the exact same way he did elsewhere. Rachel folded sheets in the linen room. Her hands moved on autopilot, but her mind was far away back in her apartment, where Leo now kept the new drawing supplies in a shoebox like treasure. He hadn't said much since the gala, not about Daniel, not about the room that went silent, but he'd started drawing more. And every single picture included that same tall figure. Sometimes the man had a briefcase, sometimes a cape, sometimes a tie and a baseball glove, but always the same eyes. That evening, after another quiet dinner, Rachel tucked Leo into bed and sat beside him, fingers combing through his curls. "Did you like your new markers?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Do you know who gave them to you?" Leo shrugged, but a smile tugged at his lips. "I think he wants to say sorry." Rachel blinked fast. "Sorry for what?" "For not seeing me sooner." Her breath hitched. Leo looked up at her, eyes wide, serious, and older than they should have been. "Mom, do you think he knows now?" Rachel didn't answer. She just kissed his forehead and whispered, "Maybe." The next morning, Rachel stood near the marble staircase, clipboard in hand. When a familiar voice called her name, she turned. It was Grant Thompson. He nodded toward the East Hall. "Mr. Whitmore would like to speak with you." In his office, Rachel's heart stopped, then started again faster, louder. She nodded, set the clipboard down with shaking hands, and walked toward the one room she'd only ever entered to clean, and never once as herself. The walk felt longer than usual. Her palms were damp. Her breath came too fast. Every step echoed like a warning. By the time she reached the door, her throat was dry, and her courage had shrunk to a whisper. Grant opened the door without a word. Daniel stood behind his desk jacket off, sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets. He didn't ask her to sit, just looked at her. "I read your letter," he said quietly. Rachel nodded, barely able to meet his eyes. "You should have told me. I wanted to," she whispered, "so many times, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose the only safe place I had for him." Daniel nodded slowly. "Is he mine?" The question landed between them like a stone in water rippling out, but too heavy to float. Rachel swallowed. "Yes." The word didn't need elaboration. It existed all on its own, small, fragile, final. Daniel looked down, then back at her. He looked human. Rachel blinked. "I remember that night," he said, "and I remember how I felt less alone with you than I had in a long time." She stayed quiet. Tears pressed against the backs of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Leo's a good kid," Daniel continued. "He's smart. He's got this way of watching people, like he already knows them." He paused, "And he has my eyes." Rachel took a step forward. Her voice was softer than she meant. "I didn't expect anything. Not money, not help. I just didn't want him to grow up thinking he was a mistake." Daniel met her gaze. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he stepped past her out the door, down the hallway, without another word. Rachel turned in confusion, her heart racing. And then she heard it. Laughter, small, pure, familiar. She moved to the window and looked out into the garden. There was Daniel, crouched beside Leo under the magnolia tree. The boy looked up wary at first. Daniel picked up a green marker and began to draw beside him. A shaky tree, a crooked house, a smiley sun. Leo blinked, then smiled wider. Rachel stood at the edge of the garden, one hand over her chest, watching it unfold. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a speech, but it was something, a beginning. Some truths don't need to be said out loud. They just need to be seen. And sometimes, love begins with a crayon and a quiet yes. Chapter 7. A box of crayons on the doorstep. One quiet gesture changes how a boy sees the world and how a woman dares to hope. Daniel chooses presence over power. Is a single act of kindness the start of something, or the end of what never was? The next morning, the sun rose through gauzy curtains, like it didn't know what had happened the night before. Rachel woke slowly, not because she'd slept well, but because something had shifted. The quiet felt different, not empty, not heavy, just still. She rubbed her eyes and reached across the small bed to smooth the blanket Leo had kicked off. He was already awake, sitting at the window with his chin resting on the sill, watching the garden like it held answers. He didn't speak. He just sat there, as if waiting. When Rachel opened the door to get the laundry she'd left folded outside, she froze. A box sat on the mat, small, brown, tied with string. There was no note at first, just her name in Daniel Whitmore's unmistakable handwriting. Inside, rows and rows of new art supplies, crayons, pastels, watercolors, sketchbooks, thick with blank pages, and one folded slip of paper tucked into the corner. Keep creating. She stared at it for a long time, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. This was Daniel's way of saying something, not everything, but something. Leo's voice broke the silence. "Is that for me?" She turned, nodded. He rushed to the box like it held magic, and maybe it did. He pulled out a green crayon, the same shade he'd worn down to a nub, and held it up like treasure. Rachel watched him. She didn't say a word, but her chest ached with the weight of hope. Later that day, Daniel didn't walk past her like he used to. He didn't look through her. He paused, And when their eyes met in the corridor, she saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Not guilt, not confusion, something else. Recognition. The staff began to notice, not all at once, but in the small ways that matter. Edward Hill frowned more often, watched Rachel with narrowed eyes. But Grant Thompson gave her a soft nod now when they passed not one of authority, but of understanding, like he knew, like he'd always known more than he let on. That afternoon, Rachel took Leo to the garden again. He had his new sketchbook clutched under one arm, his small hand in hers. They sat on the edge of the grass, near the same tree where Daniel had drawn beside him. Leo didn't say much. He just opened the sketchbook and began to draw. Two figures, one small, one tall, both with the same eyes. But this time, they were smiling. "Mom," Leo said after a while, "do you think he'll come back?" Rachel hesitated. "Who?" "You know." She swallowed. "I don't know, baby, but maybe." Leo kept drawing, and Rachel realized something. Even if Daniel never said the words, Leo had felt it. That moment in the garden, he'd felt seen. And sometimes, that's all a child needs to hold on to. That evening, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, the open box of crayons beside her. Her hand still trembled when she touched the paper Daniel had written on. "Keep creating." She folded it again, slipped it between pages of her old journal, the one she hadn't written in since Leo was born. She didn't know what Daniel's gesture meant. She didn't know if it was the start of something or just a gentle goodbye. But for now, her son had smiled, and that was enough. In the West Wing, Daniel sat in his study, the photo still on his desk. He didn't pour bourbon, didn't open emails. He just stared out the window, at the garden, at the child, at the soft light spilling across the lawn. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking in numbers. He was thinking about a woman who never once asked him for anything, a boy who called him daddy in front of the world, and a truth that couldn't be hidden by silence anymore. Sometimes love doesn't knock. It leaves a box on your doorstep and waits to see if you'll open the door. Chapter 8. Rachel. He wants to see you. A woman called into the very room where her silence began. The moment Daniel hears the full truth and chooses to walk toward it. When you've hidden so long, can you still trust someone to look at you and stay? The morning was still young when the knock came. Rachel was on her knees in the front corridor, scrubbing the marble grout just as she had for 5 years. Her hands were raw, her mind far away. She didn't expect the voice behind her, Rachel. She turned, startled. Grant Thompson stood in the hallway, hands folded, expression unreadable. "Mr. Whitmore would like to see you." In his office, she froze, not because she didn't hear the words, but because she had, clearly, intentionally. She rose slowly, wiping her damp hands on her apron. Her palms were wet, but her heart was worse racing with something she didn't have a name for. Hope, terror, both. The hall to Daniel's private office had never felt longer. The walls stretched, the polished floors echoing every footstep like they wanted her to turn around. Rachel had cleaned this hallway 100 times, but she'd never walked it for herself. Grant opened the door and stepped aside. Daniel stood near the window, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets. He didn't motion for her to sit. He just turned and looked at her, and for the first time, there was no armor in his eyes, only something slower, heavier. "Real, I read your letter," he said quietly. Rachel nodded, barely able to meet his gaze. He moved around the desk, standing just a few feet away now. "You should have told me." Her voice came out thin, but steady. "I wanted to so many times, but I had no one. And I didn't want to lose the only place I felt safe. For Leo, for myself." Daniel exhaled, slow. "Is he mine?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, That word hung between them like something sacred. Daniel didn't ask for proof. He didn't demand explanations. He just walked back to the desk, picked up the photo, the one from the garden party, and stared at it for a long time. "I remember that night," he finally said. "I remember not just the pain, but how quiet it felt. Being with you, like I could breathe again." Rachel blinked quickly, trying to keep the tears from falling. "I didn't expect anything from you," she whispered. "I never did. But Leo, he's getting older." He started noticing, and I couldn't lie to him anymore. Daniel nodded. "He's a good kid." "He is. He's curious. He sees people. He's yours," she said softly. And with that, the wall cracked. Daniel walked toward the door. For a moment, Rachel thought he was leaving, but then she heard it. Laughter, light, soft. She followed, confused, until she reached the garden. And there beneath the magnolia, Leo sat cross-legged, sketching again with his new markers. He looked up as Daniel approached. "Hey, Leo," Daniel said. Crouching beside him, Leo stared, unsure. "Can I join you?" Leo blinked, then nodded slowly. Daniel sat beside him, picked up a green marker, started drawing, not well, not confidently, but with him, a tree, a sun, a small, crooked house. Rachel watched from the edge of the lawn, one hand pressed to her chest. This wasn't a declaration, wasn't a headline, but it was something, a beginning. Some men prove love with rings or riches, but some begin with a crayon and a question. "Can I sit beside you?" Chapter 9. Breakfast in the main house. The smallest shift can feel like the biggest miracle. Leo is seen not just by his father, but by a world that once ignored him. What does it mean to belong in a world you were never supposed to touch? Nothing in the Whitmore estate looked different. The chandeliers still glittered. The walls still whispered. The staff still moved in silence, brushing past power like it was contagious. But something had changed, because on Monday morning, Leo Taylor, age 5, curly-haired, crayon-stained, was invited to breakfast. In the main dining room, Rachel stood outside the door as Leo sat, tiny feet dangling from an antique velvet chair, eyes wide as silver trays were uncovered. Daniel sat at the head of the table, coffee in hand. He didn't speak much, didn't force conversation, but when Leo looked at him, unsure, he nodded and said, "Try the strawberries. They're from California," and that was enough. Rachel hadn't been invited to stay. She hadn't expected to be. She stood quietly outside, near the entrance, hands folded tightly in front of her apron. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, to pull Leo out, to protect him before it got complicated. But something held her there. Maybe it was the way Leo laughed when he accidentally dropped his fork and Daniel bent to pick it up. Maybe it was the way Daniel didn't flinch when Leo asked, "Do you ever draw trees?" Maybe it was the way the room didn't fall silent this time. It just adjusted, like it had finally made space for something it didn't understand. Word spread quietly. The staff noticed first, noticed how Leo wandered the garden now, unafraid, how Daniel would sometimes pause during meetings to glance out the window, how Rachel wasn't invisible anymore. Grant Thompson passed her in the hallway one afternoon and said nothing, just handed her a folded napkin with a single word written inside, "Steady." She didn't know what it meant exactly, but it calmed her in a way nothing else had. A week later, a private tutor began arriving at the estate, not for a Whitmore heir, not for the child of a board member, but for Leo, a boy born in silence, raised behind the east wing, taught to disappear. Daniel never made a statement, never issued a press release. There were no photos in the tabloids, no dramatic declarations, but he showed up. He sat beside Leo during reading time. He asked him questions. He started walking through the garden more often, not to clear his mind, but to be found, and Leo found him. Again and again, Rachel watched it unfold in fragments, small moments, quiet changes. She didn't ask what it meant, didn't press for a title or a plan. But each time Daniel looked at Leo, not with shock or obligation, but recognition, something inside her healed, just a little. One afternoon, as she walked past the study, she heard voices, not raised, not tense, just gentle. Leo was telling Daniel about a dream he had about a treehouse made of jelly beans and clouds. And Daniel, billionaire, pharmaceutical tycoon, man once known for being unreadable, responded with, "Would it have a ladder or an elevator?" Leo laughed. "You'd need wings." Daniel chuckled. "Well, guess I'd better grow some." Rachel leaned against the wall just outside the door. She didn't interrupt. She just listened and cried quietly because she had fought so long to keep Leo safe. She had almost forgotten what it meant for him to be seen. Edward Hill, the estate's head of staff, didn't approve. She saw it in the way he watched her, saw it in how he stiffened when Leo entered a room. But he said nothing, because Daniel had made a decision not with speeches, but with presence. And in this house, that meant everything. Rachel still worked, still scrubbed floors, still folded sheets, but people no longer bumped past her like furniture. They moved around her, made room. Even the chandelier light looked different, softer, somehow. Or maybe it was her. Maybe she was different now, because for the first time in a long time, Rachel Taylor was no longer hiding, not from Daniel, not from the truth, not even from herself. Sometimes, the greatest kind of love doesn't change the world. It simply makes a little boy feel like he belongs in it. Chapter 10. Truth that grows in the quiet. Not all love stories are loud. Some live in the softest places. Rachel no longer needs to be chosen because she's already whole. What if the life you were building in the shadows was the only one worth living? Spring came slowly to Connecticut that year, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with tiny green shoots pressing through the garden soil. The kind of growth that takes time, patience, stillness. Rachel stood in the kitchen window one morning, drying a dish with Leo humming quietly beside her, his shoulders relaxed, his feet bare, his face finally unburdened. He was drawing again. This time, not stick figures, but real things. Their apartment, the magnolia tree, Daniel, reading with his glasses on, legs crossed, hair slightly mussed. Rachel's hands paused. The drawing was good, too good for 5. But it wasn't the detail that undid her. It was the peace in Leo's face as he shaded in the garden grass. He didn't ask if Daniel loved him. He didn't need to, because somehow, in moments small and steady, he'd found an answer that lived outside of words. Daniel hadn't said much after that first real conversation. He hadn't asked Rachel to move upstairs, hadn't offered money, or made promises. But he showed up every week. Every morning he wasn't in the city. A new sketch pad for Leo, a quiet wave when passing Rachel in the hallway, the occasional pause in the dining room when she refilled his glass eyes meeting. No words needed. There was no fairy tale, no declaration of love, but there was something deeper: trust, recognition, truth. Rachel didn't try to label it. She didn't need to, because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. She felt seen. And more importantly, so did Leo. The staff continued to whisper. Grant smiled more often. Edward scowled. But Rachel kept working, kept showing up, not because she had to, but because she could. Because she had built something honest out of silence. One night, long after Leo had gone to sleep, Rachel sat on the floor of their tiny living room with the photo in her lap, the same one from 5 years ago. She unfolded it, traced the corners, and smiled, not because it made her sad, but because it reminded her of what could bloom from a moment you never planned. She thought of Daniel, how he'd changed, not dramatically, but where it mattered. She thought of Leo, born from loneliness, now growing in light, and she whispered to the quiet, "We're going to be okay." Outside, Daniel stood under the magnolia tree. He looked up at the window of the apartment tucked behind the east wing. He could see the glow of a lamp, the silhouette of a woman kneeling at the edge of a child's bed. He watched her kiss his forehead, and in that moment, Daniel felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Gratitude, not for power, not for wealth, but for a second chance he never earned, and a child who had forgiven him before he ever knew what to ask for. Closing scene. Leo's latest drawing sat on the table. A house with 2 windows, a garden in full bloom, 3 figures, a boy, a man, and a woman sitting on the grass, legs crossed, laughing. No crowns, no gold, just smiles. At the top, written in bold green crayon, "My family." Some stories don't need headlines or endings. They just need to be lived day by quiet day. In the space between silence and love, love doesn't always announce itself. Have you ever held a truth so quietly for so long that even when it finally came to light, you didn't know whether to cry, run, or simply breathe? Rachel Taylor did. She never asked for a miracle. She never dreamed of a mansion, a title, or a hand reaching back for hers. All she wanted was for her son to grow up not feeling like he was someone's accident, someone's regret. All she ever fought for in silence, in service, in secondhand uniforms was dignity. And in the end, she didn't get a fairy tale. She got something better. She got seen. Leo doesn't remember the gala the way Rachel does. He remembers the music, the pretty glass things, the moment the man who looked like him turned around when he said, "Daddy." But what stays with him, even now, isn't the way the room gasped. It's the way Daniel sat beside him days later and asked if he could draw a house too. That's what children remember. Not what we say in the hardest moments, but who stayed, who bent down to their level, who showed up. Daniel Whitmore never issued a public statement. There was no apology in the papers, no headline that read, "Billionaire CEO finds out he has a son with the maid." But what mattered wasn't what the world saw. It was what Leo felt, and what Rachel finally knew. That truth, when spoken gently, can make room where shame once lived. Rachel still cleans floors, still wakes early, still folds her son's socks in pairs before school. But now, people make room when she enters a hall. Now, when she passes Daniel in the garden, he nods, sometimes says her name, once even smiled. And Leo, he still draws, but now he draws all 3 of them. No one said family. No one needed to, because love, real love, doesn't need ceremony. It just needs quiet, time, and a place to grow. So maybe you've carried something like this too. A truth no one asked you to speak, but one you've been holding all the same. Maybe you've loved in silence, protected someone who never knew how much they were being shielded. Maybe you've spent your whole life folding the corners of your pain into something smaller just to survive. If so, this story was for you. Because you don't need loud moments to matter. You don't need the world to validate the love you carry. You just need to know you are not invisible. You are not broken. And the quiet kind of love, it lasts. Rachel was never rich. Leo was never royalty. Daniel was never ready. But somehow, between what was lost and what was dared, they built something no one could take. Not all stories end with rings or reunions. Some just settle, like dust on old furniture or light through a window. Soft, present, undeniable. And you, wherever you are tonight, maybe you're still holding your truth close to your chest, like Rachel once did. Maybe you're waiting for someone to say, "I see you." Or maybe you're the person who needs to say it, even if your voice shakes. Either way, This is your permission to speak, to forgive, to hope again, even if it starts with just a crayon. Because sometimes the greatest kind of healing doesn't happen in public. It happens at 2 a.m. beside a child's bed, with a photo in one hand and a truth in the other. It begins when you whisper to the dark, "We're going to be okay," and you will be. We'd love to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate it between 0 and 10. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you're always updated. More inspiring stories are waiting. Click here to watch them. If this story touched something in you, even a little, leave a comment. Tell someone about a time you stayed quiet to protect what mattered, or a time someone showed up for you, not with promises but with presence, because your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear to feel a little less alone. And if you want more true love stories, stories of healing, of dignity, of quiet courage, subscribe. We tell American stories, the kind that grow from pain, but bloom with grace. And the next one, it goes even deeper. So if you're still here, maybe it's because a part of you believes that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. We believe that too. See you in the next one. You matter. Even if no one clapped when you walked in the room, you still matter.